Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. And it's our final of 4 September-themed podcast episodes this month. Thank you for your support in making September a great success at raising awareness about the benefits of a scientific, data-led approach to preventing slip accidents. And I'm joined today by Daryl Wake from Dekra, one of the world's leading safety and risk management organizations. Daryl shares some fascinating behavioural data around walking and working surfaces, showing how slips, trips, and falls emerge in patterns, what the underlying causes are, and how leadership and culture play a critical role. After Daryl's session, which is roughly half of the time, I take over the baton to unpack the practical side. What can you do in your own buildings to reduce slip and trip risks, defend claims, and ultimately make your workplace safer, stronger, and more resilient? This combination of behavioural science and practical tools makes for a session packed with takeaways you can apply straight away. So let's dive in.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thank you for joining this Safety Roundtable session today with my guest, Daryl Wake from Dekra. We're going to be talking about walking and working surfaces. Daryl is going to give us some really great insights from some research that Dekra has done into this topic and some great data points. And then he's got to shoot off once he's done that. So then I'll go into some practical stuff that we can do, some tools, some philosophies, some frameworks that you guys can implement to try and mitigate slips, trips, and falls in your organizations. If you've not come across Dekra before, they're one of the world's leading expert organizations in safety, risk management, and sustainability, operating in more than 60 countries with, I think, nearly 50,000 employees, if I'm right. And yeah, they're really good at combining behavioural science, data-driven insights, and practical tools to help organizations to prevent incidents, strengthen safety culture, and improve performance. And Daryl did a session with us a few months ago now as well, talking about some of the work that Dekra do. But yeah, great to have you back again, Daryl, and feel free to start sharing your slides and talking us through what you guys have found in this area.
Thank you, Christian. Right, share button, and it says I cannot start sharing while the other participant is sharing.
Oh, I'll stop then, go on.
That's right, okay. Technology, eh?
Yeah, the joys.
And please let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, it's starting to come up now. There we go, perfect.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I think Christian's done the introductions effectively, so the accent gives it away. I'm not from this part of the world originally. I'm an Australian native. A bit about my background: I was in the Royal Australian Navy. I was basically an air traffic controller on warships for nearly 10 years, and then it was time for me to have a change. So I entered the mining and minerals processing business, starting at the lowest of levels as an operator on a massive mine site, ship supervisor within about 3 months, and then started to get into integrated management systems. Sadly, actually, after there was a couple of people, friends of mine, that actually died at work. So I became a safety practitioner, and I've essentially done that ever since. I was with the legacy company, Behavioural Science Technologies, and they were really, for those of you now part of Dekra, acquired about 15 years ago. BST were the pioneering organisation in behavioural safety sciences. Some of you might have heard of Dr. Thomas Krause, a psychologist, And back in 1977, I believe it was, him and the former founder of BST, John Hinley, really spent a lot of time, did a lot of research in why people do what they do, and did a lot of data analysis, and we still actually do this today very, very successfully. So as Christian said, what I'll do is I'll give you a brief insights on how we see behavioural safety sciences, or as in industry referred to quite often as behavioural-based safety, how we see it coming together. And then from two perspectives, from literally a peer-to-peer observation, and then more leadership to frontline employee from a data perspective. But as Christian is in the business around sort of slips and trips, around walking and working services, just show you some data and then some further granularity on the data that we capture through some of our digitisation of some of the work that we do with our clients. So from our point of view, we have a process flow that has 4 critical elements when we partner with our clients around behavioural change programs. And the very first step is, and we believe that, and the way we work is no two behavioural implementations with our clients are the same, because they're not. Because you've got injury statistics, you've got behavioural issues, and you do have culture issues. So step one when we work out with our clients is identifying, and it's similar to Pareto's principle. There's only a few behaviours that's actually causing most of your injuries or accidents on site. So number one, we do data extraction with our clients, and we focus on a few that's causing most of the blood, break and bruises on site. So that's very step one. So we actually put a name to those behaviours. And then step two is to gather the data. So how do you gather it? Of course, you go out. We spend a lot of time upskilling either internal consultants, or we spend time with observers, the initial pool, and they start to go out and observe for those critical behaviours. The next part, which sometimes is missed out, sometimes, not all the times, but we're of the belief there has to be some sort of interaction with the person or the trained observer and the employees, focusing on not only the good, so they, from our point of view, you record everything that you see, particularly these critical behaviours, but also when you see behaviours that are at risk, we have to understand why is the employee working in that manner. And then the fourth point, and again, this is overlooked a lot of time, is you've got a lot of behavioural observation data. What do you actually do with the data? So, from our point of view, our terminology is around action planning. So looking for themes and trends, and again, I'll show you some of this data in a moment. What's the data telling us? So is it a one-off? Is it a theme? Is it a trend? Can you link that back to your safety performance? And again, we believe that a good behavioural safety process is dynamic. It's not static. So, as your culture improves, perhaps some of these behaviours that were identified before as a challenge, as a concern, it might not now be a critical behaviour. So you go back to the starting sheet. So these documents, these checklists, these tools that you use within your behavioural observation programs, they should be changed and altered from time to time. I'm not going to spend too much on this, but this is our process flow, how it all comes together. So we're of the belief that what gets the senior leaders' attention, whether it's safety, whether it's finance, whether it's the new thing at the moment perhaps might be saying sustainability, the top person within the organisation really should sponsor the behavioural observation process. That's then linked to the steering committee. So again, a group of people, they talk to the workers. There's a process that's coming, etc., etc. From an observer and data collection point of view, these should be highly skilled. Typically, and the independent research that Cambridge University did around it's called the behavioural accident prevention process. They should have some sort of specialisation. So there's no real good effect and probably use of times if you've got someone from the cafe or the restaurant, like a chef or a cook, looking at people in their electrical substation doing racking out or whatever it is. So they should be specialised as well. But the thing I really want to focus on and show you in the forthcoming slides is around the data management. So what are you actually doing with the data once you've collected it? So we have a digital solution. It's called Adaptive. What I want to show you is, again, it's linked to walking and working services, again, linked to Christian's point of view around how can we minimise exposure and injuries pertaining to this. So this is just one of our clients. And to give you a very quick overview, so they've now got over 100 vessels in their fleet. The behavioural approach has been in place now, still in its infancy, but it's giving them very good results. So it's about 2.5 years since we started observations, or they did within their organisation. But the specific data window that you're looking at here is 12 months. So it's from August last year to just a few weeks ago. So as you can see, over that period of time, there was just over 7,500 observations across your fleet. But what was important, and as you can see, there was the fifth cab off the rank so far as at-risk behaviours. So these were observations where trained and skilled observers believed that the employees that they were observing at that point of time, the observation, were actually at risk. And it had been identified when we do the initial behaviour extraction that this is an inherent behaviour that is causing some of your processes. There's others around hand and eyes and face and all this. But what's interesting, and I think what's overlooked sometimes, is the granularity. So when you go down further and you do our terminology, not anyone else's, is action planning, is fully understanding what's going on, but where it is as well. So as you can see, of those 100 plus vessels, there was 3 vessels where 58% of these at-risk behaviours was occurring. So again, focus on the few, don't fix everything, focus on the few. The times observations with these at-risk behaviours, there was 8 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and then 6 p.m. as well. The data also identified Thursday, Tuesdays, and Sunday was again a theme. But then the other part is, so what sort of tasks and activities were these people doing where at the point of the observation? So you can see there was a distinct theme around people were chipping on deck, people were cleaning all spills on decks, freshwater filtration were being maintained and or overhauled. People were painting on deck, and then lastly, the fifth top task that from these observations, there was others as well, but there was groups and themes around these particular activities where, again, it was mainly deck maintenance where people were using these pneumatic guns to actually refurbish and modify the decks with the use of grinders as well. To go down further, so what was causing most of these at-risk behaviours where people were seen to be working at risk? So all traces were left on the deck. People were identifying that, there was poor housekeeping, so, hoses left around. And the third one was like tools and equipment had simply been left in walkways where actually people were passing at the time of the observations. Now, from our point of view, there's 3 different types of behaviour. To explain them just in principle: enabled or an easy behaviour. So was this behaviour within control of the employee to do something differently to actually protect themselves? And the second one is difficult. So it's within my control, but it's a bit more hassle. It's a bit more difficult for me to undertake this behaviour in a safe manner. And the third type of behaviour is not enabled or difficult, impossible. So it's outside of my control. Now, what was really clear, and if I go back to some of those other behaviours I identified in that small chart around line of fire, head, eyes and face and hand. It's quite a common theme. So if this particular employee at the time of the observation had, wiped up the oil traces, fixed up or rectified the levels of housekeeping, whether they had put the tools and equipment back into a designated storage area. So they could have done something around these issues and concerns that they'd seen at this. So the fix, you can see there is some that might be a bit more difficult. For example, there mightn't have been some tool or storage areas to put this plant and equipment around. But most of the times, as you can see from the data, there's very, very few circumstances where there's been non-enable behaviour. So it's completely outside my control. To scroll down a bit further in the data, as you can see, 56% of these observations where people were working at risk. Most of them were on the deck. Some of them were in the engine room, and a few of them were in the galley. And again, one of the things that we always flag, again, it's back to, similar to what I said before, of those things that are critical, and then those things are not critical. We do quite a lot of work around serious injury and fatality prevention. So when we identify these critical behaviours with our client, we have discussions and work groups around do we not believe that this particular behaviour is linked to serious injury and fatality prevention or potential. So as you can see through all of these observations that we found, they were at ground level. So in the system, in the data itself, the observers were of the belief at the time of the observation at ground level, none of these at-risk behaviours could have been life-threatening, life-altering, and indeed a fatality, or had the potential to have this. So that's looking at sort of primarily frontline worker to frontline worker. Then we actually look at, so we have probably 70% of the work that we do. So again, back to a very simple analogy. If you have safety problems, you do have cultural problems. If you have cultural problems, you do have leadership problems. So we spend a hell of a lot of time with our clients around leadership development programs. One in particular is called SafeLine. Now, our behavioural approach it's been researched in depth by Cambridge University, and then more recently, our leadership development program has had some research, independent research done by London Business School. Both of them suggest that our approaches get excellent results. So our program around leadership development is called SafeLine. It's a series of, typically assessments, but then educational activities and also in-field coaching as well. One of those in-field coachings, again, it's our narrative, not anyone else's, is around safety contact. So this is more of a behavioural observation processes that's really targeted at frontline leaders and also managers in business. Now, in our software platform, we can actually look across clients as well, and the data you're looking at on the graph on the bottom left-hand side there is from across 27 of our clients, 7 nations, including over here in Europe and UK, and 5 industries as well. Again, this is a much bigger data set. This is now 3 years worth of data, nearly 17,000 observations were captured in the process. But what came out, and again, this is when I said to Christian, hey, we've got some data and we should share this. You can clearly see that in this instance, again, it's at ground level, missteps and falls is the number one thing that's been flagged where people have been exposed to a injury of sorts. And it's the number one highest exposure category. If you look across all of these behavioural and or activity aspects, it's flagged number one and considerably. Again, you go down to the data. Again, I know I'm looking across a lot of clients here, but we can see different departments, themes are coming up. Again, the behavioural type. In this particular instance, most of these observations was within control of the employee to do something differently. You can see some of these from this process. Some of them were a bit more difficult, and again, very few were non-enabled. So it's saying we don't need a lot of engineering controls. We don't need a lot of sort of hardwiring, massive, convoluted action planning processes or projects to fix most of these. It does come down to the end of the day about trying to modify through feedback and also consequences, positive and negative, that you can get that change. You can have a big impact on the behaviour of people. Again, some days of the week came up. This time, instead of Sunday, it was Friday. And again, some themes. So there was floor hazards, area obstructions, water-related risks, similar to the marine business, hazards in walkways, and another generic comment came up, just general tripping hazards. This was a bit more interesting. So the data from a supervisory perspective was saying about 4% of these, they believe, that there was that flagged that it had, in our terms, SIF potential, so serious injury and fatality. And they, to us, always should undergo more scrutiny so far as action planning. So just conclusions. So there's a lot of data, but when you really go down in the granularity, the patterns, when you use data effectively from any observational process, you can clearly understand what are those themes, what are those cluster areas, and you can capture those near miss. So for us, when you're looking at people's behaviour, typically we focus on what's over our shoulder. So all the things that happened yesterday, whereas we try and really get our clients, perhaps even industry, to look ahead. What are those behaviours that you believe have the most at-risk potential before they actually hit your dashboard? So I was looking at the old iceberg model, really focus on what's below the waterline. Quantifying from a behavioural perspective, as you can see from our data approach, rank them, focus on flag things like SIF potential. And then once you actually understand that, then there's some real proactive action planning and then some sort of accountability that's linked to all this around what is the area of concern. As you can see, I know this particular client, they did do some action planning, further action planning, and focus on those 3 particular vessels that was actually causing most of the problems for that particular organisation. So, Christian, I know it was brief. That's pretty much me.
Thanks, Daryl. Have you got time for a couple of? Yeah, I was going to say, have you got time for a couple of questions? If anybody has got a question for Daryl, feel free to pop it in the chat, or if you want to come and have a chat to him, then you can go to reactions, raise your hand, and I'll call you up. One thing from me, what was interesting was just this thought around, you guys, as I understand it, are working in a lot of kind of higher risk injuries, sectors, in industries. And yet this is, the number one in terms of the volume of observations. Is that sort of worrying in that, maybe in a less high risk industry, there could be even more of these? Because, my perception, and from what we've discussed before, is that, these types of industries tend to be pretty good at mitigating the more serious risks.
And I think it depends, Christian. Yeah, it depends on the nature of the business. Take a marine business. A marine business is walking to and fro all the time, but we've worked, our behavioural processes have worked in retail before. One in particular was telecommunications, and this particular organisation, it was identified people were walking and working from a lot of their salespeople, and this particular organisation, the number one injury that they found within their organisation was actually, and they gave everyone a tablet, right? A tablet. And these people were actually, the data told us, people were looking at their tablets while they're actually walking between door to door, selling mobile phone contracts back in the day. That was a few years ago now. So again, the action planning it was causing most of their problems. So the action planning was around this particular instance was distraction. They had like a cardinal rule that was introduced. We do not walk while we're distracted being on the tablet. You park up, you do your sort of data entry and stuff like that, but you walk along as well. So look, it is, most of our work, as you said, is probably in high risk, but there's more of those benign industries where this comes up as well a lot. Absolutely. And it's causing problems.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. Yeah, I mean the Riddle data, which I'll talk about in a minute, shows that across industries as well. And Daryl, if people are keen to sort of learn a bit more about Dekra and how they might be able to work with you, are there any particular resources or events or websites or anything that they should go to?
Yeah, well, as you well know, we're up in the Humber region today, so we have a little Dekra event, but it's been so well attended. So we look after our particular business unit is organisational process safety. But the feedback yesterday and the verbatim comments from today, we have organisational safety today. We'll be running more of these. But in saying that, if you go to dekra.co.uk, I believe it is off the top of my head, we have a massive resource centre there. So there's case studies, there's technical white papers that include some of this independent research. And by all means, you can reach out to me. And, we do a lot of safety days for organisations where we come and we speak. And, by all means, just reach out, whatever's. But the resource hub there's a plethora of information where people can go to. Now, that's around leadership, it's around culture, it's around behaviour, serious injury and fatality prevention, lots of many things.
Good stuff. All right, Daryl. Well, thank you so much for changing your diary and nipping out for half an hour to do this. I really do appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. What's left of it.
Thanks, Daryl. Good stuff. So that's some really. I wanted to share that from Daryl because the data and the insights are really fascinating. And then what I'm going to now move into for the next half of this is a bit of the what can we do to prevent these things from happening. So let's pull up some slides here, and I'll talk you through some of the stuff I've been doing this month in particular with the likes of NEBOSH and IOSH and IIRSM and many others as well. So Daryl's explained the size and scope of this problem from his perspective. I'll give you a bit more data on this in a minute as well. But the key thing I want you to know, and Daryl said this as well, is that slips, trips and falls are absolutely presentable. And so I'm going to give you now a bit of a roadmap in terms of what you can do to try to prevent them from happening. And the idea here is we should be able to see both fewer incidents and better claims defensibility. So, of course, we want to see fewer people getting hurt and therefore fewer claims coming through. But also we want to be able to be in a strong position to robustly defend any claims that do arise because, with the best will in the world, even if we do every single thing that I'm going to share with you today, and even if you get my book and you devour it and you implement every single thing that the book says, there's still a chance somebody might suffer from a slip. But if we have done all of that work and we can prove we've done it, we should be in a very, very good position. This is all going to be off the back of proven science. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for you joining me today? Fewer incidents, less harm, getting some time back, because this is the most frequent issue you're going to be dealing with. If we could massively cut this, that's going to save you a lot of time. By getting outcomes in this area, this is a problem that nags and sustains and is really frustrating, and it's always there on the accident reports and the claims review meetings and so on. We can drive up some recognition and respect for doing something about this, and of course give you a lot more reassurance. So Daryl's painted a really good picture. Let's do just a quick bit of crystal ball gazing here and think about, what if we just continue on and we go the way we've always been and we don't change? So a bit more data from me, just to give some further context. This is the Riddle data from the HC, and you can see that it's very, very flat for I think there's 11 years shown on this chart. If we went back the prior 10 years, it would also be very, very flat. So what this shows is that slips, trips, and falls are the biggest cause of serious injury at work. In fact, they're the biggest cause of accidents, of injuries, and insurance claims, as we'll speak about in a minute. So we've got a flat picture and by far the biggest category. So there's a big, big human cost here. What about financial costs? So just to give you an idea on this, we work with AXA Insurance, and there's an article on their website which says that in 2018, they spent £80 million on slip claims, 80. And that compared to 30 million for manual handling. So slips was 2.5 times the size of manual handling in terms of costs. And then trip claims were on top of that. So that was the picture in 2018. What's happened since then? Well, the data has remained very, very flat. Yeah, so if anything, slightly gone up. So we're still having large numbers of these incidents. But what about what's been going on in the world, particularly since 2020? Massive inflation. So the number of incidents is remaining pretty static, but the cost of these incidents has only been rising. So if we think about that in the context of that's the historic picture, what's going on now in the world that is going to be changing this going forward and can make us think, right, should we be doing this better? What would be the benefit of doing this better? So here are 6 big sort of mega trends that I often cite. There's obviously inflation continuing. There's aging demographics. The older you are, the much more susceptible you are to an injury and a serious and costly claim. There's the fact that we're becoming more and more litigious as a society. There's a big trend towards urbanization, so buildings are getting busier and busier with higher footfall. There's this ESG movement where I think increasingly actually being good at safety rather than just talking about safety is going to make a difference to your ability to attract and retain staff and attract and retain customers and get investment as well. And then finally, we've got big challenges around workforce and labour supply. So if we overlay, a very bad picture historically that has been getting worse with all of those 6 things, the answer is that if we don't do anything, things are only going to get worse. So we're going to see more incidents, more harm, more cost, more stress for you guys, and obviously more scrutiny coming from internally and externally from third parties. What about if we do things differently? What about if we could do this better? Fewer incidents, less harm, lower cost, less stress, more trust, and an ability to profit from safety, which is an expression that I use a lot. So I would suggest that, bearing in mind what Daryl shared, bearing in mind that RIDDOR data and the financial costs and all of these other trends, it's a really important thing to try to be better in this area. So what does that look like? What could that look like? What is possible in the field of slips in particular? So here's 6 examples of clients that we have supported over the years and some of the outcomes that they've achieved. So only one of them, you'll note, says elimination. The rest of them are showing significant reductions. But as I said at the start, we can't, with the best will in the world, say we're going to eliminate this risk. But we can absolutely have a massive, massive impact on the number of incidents, injuries, and claims that are coming through. A couple of these in a bit more detail, just to think about, well, would this work for me? Could this be relevant to my sector? If you think about footfall, so, it's a very busy place, we can't do anything, it's inevitable. Euston train station is one of the busiest buildings in the country. Network Rail published the data of the project we did with them, where we effectively tweaked their cleaning regime. And as a result of that, year on year, they saw a 60% decrease in reported slips. So no expensive refurbishments or anything like that. We gave them a more scientific method of cleaning, and that saw a big, big decrease. What about, well, my floors are always wet. I can't keep them dry. It's impossible. We can't stop people slipping around a swimming pool, let's say, or in a hotel bathtub or an external area. We work with a leisure club operator with over 150 sites. They were having one slip accident claim per week, 52 per year on average over the prior 3 years. After about 6 months, that trend went down to one per month. So that's about a 40 claims fewer per year. And given the average claim is somewhere between 10 and £20,000, that's a multiple six-figure saving from the claims alone, but they also got lots of other benefits as well. So even in an area where floors are constantly getting wet, in fact, they're designed to be wet, you absolutely can stop people from slipping over. Now let's cover trips quickly because slips and trips, as I'll talk about in a minute, are different. So this is what you need to do around trips. So the first thing we need to know is that slips, trips, and falls are not the same thing. I did a podcast episode this morning actually where we talked about categorization of incidents, and this one came up. If you've got a problem with people slipping, then what I'm about to tell you around trips is not going to have any effect. On the other side, if people are tripping and you start to do some of the stuff I'm going to talk to you about in a minute about preventing slips, that's not going to work for you either. So we need to understand, are people slipping or tripping? And then are they falling as a result of a slip or a trip, or are they falling for some other reason? So we've got to split these things out. Just to give you a bit of context in terms of volume, so that RIDDOR data was slips, trips, and falls together. In most sectors, slips is massively bigger than trips. So if we look at manufacturing, for example, this is insurance claims data. Slips are 38% of insurance claims in the manufacturing sector. Trips are only 3% of claims. So it's sort of 12 times more slips than trips. So one reason I focus on slips is that they're a much bigger challenge, a much bigger problem. They affect a lot more people. But also, as you'll start to see in a minute, they're a lot more complex. There's a lot more to it. So here's what to do on trips. Trip, TRIP. These are the four key principles. Tidy, which is about good housekeeping. Route, which is about defining walkways where possible. Identify, which is about understanding and raising awareness of hazards. And then plan, which is about good design and maintenance. And if you can do these four things, which are all simple, fairly straightforward things to do, depending on what phase of a building you're at, you will see a big impact on trips. One thing you need to know about trips is you've got to differentiate between a fixed hazard and a temporary hazard. So when we say we've got to focus on thorough housekeeping, that's great to deal with a temporary trip hazard like a trailing cable, but it's not going to help you at all if you've got a lip in a walkway that's kind of jutting up above the flat surface. So there's more detail even to trips than people sometimes think, but these would be the four key principles. Something you can go away with today and start doing is using a £1 coin to stop trips. So this is something I picked up on over the years from EHOs who will go out and inspect sites. And what you do is you get a £1 coin or a euro coin or one of those trolley coins and lay it flat on its face and put that down next to the trip hazard. And basically, if the trip hazard is lower than the side of that flat coin, then that's one to monitor. If it's above, then this is definitely a hazard and we should try and address it. So as a way of quantifying very easily and quickly whether a trip hazard is one that you should deal with or not, you can go away today and start using a £1 coin to do that. And just don't forget and leave £1 coins on the floor everywhere. Let's move on to slips then, because there's a bit more to slips. And I'm just going to give you one key insight on why slips remains a big problem. And it's this, and this is called the return on effort curve. So this isn't unique to slips. This is a model that is used in all sorts of ways, all sorts of industries, all sorts of contexts. But what it basically says is that if you put in low effort, you get a modest result. And if you put in a small extra effort, you can get a high return. And the insight is, and the data would support this, I believe, that organizations are doing the basics when it comes to slips. Vast majority of organizations are doing the basics. Now, that's good in that we're doing something, but the difference between the results I shared with you and what we're currently doing were significant in terms of percentage improvements. And it doesn't take that much extra effort or investment, whether that's time, cost, or focus, to get into this high performance area. So it's definitely within our reach to achieve an exponentially better result. But we've got to change. We've got to do things differently. We've got to put in that little bit more extra effort, and then that's how we can shift. What's stopping us doing that? To me, there are 5 key mistakes that I see again and again. So the first one is that we rely on signs as a solution. So, well, as long as the sign's out, we're okay, we're covered, or just put the sign out, we'll be fine. This is a photograph, you may have seen me share this before, of a co-op store, and there's a puddle on the floor and a yellow sign in the middle of the puddle. And if you haven't seen this before, have a think about what's good or bad about this situation. Most people think that perhaps the sign could move slightly further out into the middle of the aisle, but other than that, it looks okay because, yeah, there's water on the floor, but there's a yellow sign. So we're warning people, and therefore, that's cool. We're doing what we needed to do. The feet at the top of this screen belong to a man called Stanley May. He's about to walk down the aisle and slip. He's going to bang the back of his head, and then 2 days later, he's going to die. So the sign didn't stop the slip. It didn't stop the injury, the serious injury. It didn't stop what sadly happened to him. It did not stop a civil claim. The sign didn't cover them. And it did not stop a criminal prosecution. So they were actually fined £400,000 by Cornwall Council for this. And Cornwall Council said signage alone is not an adequate control. Proactive measures must be taken to either prevent floors becoming slippery or precluding public access. So I'm not saying to throw your signs away, but there are only 2 times you should be using a wet floor sign. One is when you're proactively cleaning a floor, and the other is temporarily while you're dealing with a spillage, perhaps for 5 minutes. If you're putting a sign out at any other time, that's a symptom of a problem that you're not dealing with correctly. So that is you doing the basics. That's you doing the bare minimum. That's you at the bottom of that return on effort curve that we spoke about. The second big mistake is believing that cleaning equals safety. So this photo here is from a shopping centre in Manchester. And when you walked in to here, you would think the floor was pretty clean. But it's not until a patch of the floor is cleaned properly, effectively, that you realise that it's actually quite dirty. So what happens is we are cleaning floors regularly, but we're not cleaning them effectively. It's a bit like going to the gym and lifting weights every day, but if you don't use the right form, the right approach, the right sort of angles of lifting and so on and so forth, you won't get stronger, you won't grow bigger muscles. You can do the activity of lifting weights, but you won't achieve the outcome you want. And what I see a lot of is the activity of cleaning, but not the outcome of safety in terms of prevention of slip risk. The third one is assuming that an anti-slip, in quote unquote, context surface stays that way. So in my experience, the majority of slips happen on floors that people perceive are not slippery. And because they perceive they're not slippery, they don't take care. And then when they are slippery, that's when obviously they end up falling over. Sorry, I just had to have a blow of my nose. I've got a bit of a cold. So two examples here. On the right, we've got a leisure centre where the perception was we've got an anti-slip floor, we're okay, and they did, but only when it was clean. So the difference between that floor clean and that patch and before the cleaning was almost 500,000 times in terms of risk. And then on the left, a spice blending facility. When you walk in here, you look at the floor and you think, oh, this is a good floor. And it was a good floor, but it was quite old. It was about 12, 15 years old. And basically, the main walkways had worn smooth. So the floor looked textured, but if you felt it, it was smooth. Whereas under the shelving and next to the skirting boards, it was still rough. So things change over time. We can't assume by looking at a floor that it's safe. The fourth big problem is thinking that insurance covers us, that insurance solves our problem. Just with your home insurance or your car insurance, there's normally an excess. Typically, that's £10,000 or £20,000. So the first cost is covered by the company. There's also what's called an aggregate, whereby if you have more than a certain amount of claims, you end up paying as well. And don't forget two things. Firstly, if you have a claim this year, yes, your insurance company may cover some or all of that cost, but next year your premium is going to go up to recover the cost of that claim. So all you're doing is really delaying the cost. And also remember the uninsured element. So not every pound of cost is covered by your insurance. HSE would say it's something like 8 to 36 times the insured cost is the uninsured cost. And the fifth one, as we already said, is treating slips like trips. So we definitely don't want to be doing that. Trips are simple. Slips are scientific. What do we mean by that? That's what I'm going to cover now. So I wrote a book, which I put out this time last year, called Prevent Slip Accidents with Slipology. Amazon #1 bestseller in safety books and insurance books. And everybody here today, everybody that watches this replay or listens to this on the podcast, I'm going to be giving you a copy of this book for free as a thank you for joining us today. I'll tell you how to get that later on. But the book sets out what you can do to prevent slips. And it's got a 5-step method in the book: assess, amend, advocate, assure, and affirm. Now, I haven't got time to go through all of that today, but I'm going to focus in on a couple of the key areas we can think about at the start of that process. Assess, which is about diagnosing your issues and quantifying your slip risk, and then amend, which is about making changes to mitigate those risks. And I'll share 3 principles that flow throughout this 5-step method and throughout the book that we can take away from today. So the first one is to tune your chimes to stop slips. So chimes is a mnemonic, and it's the 6 key reasons why somebody might slip. So if we can control in a scientific and a measurable way these 6 things, we'll have very few incidents. Whereas if we, as is often the case when I get called into organisation, and are only working in maybe 1 or 2 areas, then it's no surprise that we're going to have issues. C is for contamination. So this is what is on the floor. A clean, dry floor is not going to be slippery, but anything that produces a barrier between the foot and the floor can make it more slippery. H is for heel. That's all about footwear. One big thing here is that safety shoes don't necessarily mean slip resistant. So just by saying, oh, we offer safety shoes, that doesn't necessarily mean you're dealing with the problem as well as you might. I is for individual. This is the human factors. So gender and age play a role here. If you're an 80-year-old woman, you're more likely to slip, fall, and hurt yourself than if you're a 20-year-old man, according to the data. But also this is about activity. So pushing, pulling, twisting, turning, as Daryl said earlier, being distracted, rushing, all of these things make a slip more likely. M is maintenance, and that splits into wear and tear, as we've seen, change of use, if we're reconfiguring buildings, and cleaning, and we've seen a couple of examples of that already. E is environment, so this is about the weather and condensation and rain, but it's also about the built environment. So entrance systems like matting, steps and stairs, ramps and slopes, noise, lighting, all of these things contribute to slip risk. And then finally, S is the surface, which is the floor. And some floors are more slippery than others. And there's a way of actually measuring that, which is the second thing I wanted to talk about in this section, which is called slip testing. So I don't know if anybody's come across this before. It's called the pendulum test. This is what the HSE use. So in that co-op case I mentioned, HSE sent someone in to do this testing, and I was asked to do that testing for the co-op. It's also used in court cases, and I'll give you an example of that in a little while as well. What it's designed to do is to mimic the action of someone walking. So it's called a pendulum because it swings, and as the foot swings down, it strikes the floor like a heel does when we're walking. And the output of this test is a number called a PTV, pendulum test value. I'll quickly show you a video of it being done. So you saw the foot being released and it's swinging down like a pendulum, striking the floor, and hopefully you could see how that sort of mimics the heel strike, and then it pushes through the foot to the left, and a pointer goes onto a gauge on the machine, and that is the number. I'll show it to you again. So hopefully that helps to bring the testing to life. Now, I mentioned the output is the PTV. And what you can see here is that the PTV equates to 3 categories of slip potential, according to HSE. And it also equates to an accident risk exposure, again, HSE data. So if we score on the pendulum a PTV score of 36, shown in the bottom right here, that gives us a low slip potential and a 1 in 1 million accident risk exposure. Whereas if we move down to the left and we have a PTV of 24, then we've got a high slip potential and an accident risk exposure of 1 in 20. So quite a significant difference there between 24 and 36. So the first benefit of this test is that you can actually quantify, rather than guessing, how slippery your floors are. You can plot yourself on this chart, and then you can figure out, right, what's my risk exposure and what can I do to move in the right direction. The second benefit of the testing is going back to one thing I said at the start, it helps you to defend yourself in the event of a claim. So David Scott is a lawyer. He defends claims for a living. And we were speaking about, on my podcast, about somebody slipping on a swimming pool side in a hotel. And most people think if someone slips, if the floor was wet, and if that person legitimately hurt themselves, then they're entitled to make a claim, and that claim is almost certainly going to be paid out. And David said, no. If you have compliant slip test data, even if they slipped, even if the floor was wet, even if they hurt themselves, you should expect to defend that claim because you can prove scientifically that you've discharged your duty of care over and above the benchmark that the HSE has set. So this is often a light bulb moment for people because they kind of think, well, if someone slips, we're bang to rights, we're going to pay. No, not at all. But you need to have the right evidence and proof to defend yourself. And the third thing I wanted to talk about was taking a zonal approach. So not all floors have the same likelihood of someone slipping. There are certain areas in every building where it's unquestionable that the floor is going to foreseeably get wet or otherwise contaminated. And there are other areas where it won't. The floor is going to be dry other than a spillage, which we can deal with through a spillage control system, or when we're cleaning, and we can manage that risk by, as we said earlier, putting the signs out, cleaning out of hours, barriering areas off, etc. So we need to focus in to the more foreseeably wet areas and do more in those areas, and we can do less in the others. Now, one area that is often misunderstood is entrances, and that's because we have this thing called matting. And you can see from this photograph here, this is a train station, and it's got about 3 meters of matting, but the floor on a wet day is wet beyond the matting. So just having matting isn't enough to say this must be a dry area. The question is, does the matting actually work? And there are three factors: the maintenance of that matting, what material it's made of, and the size of it. And where most people go wrong is the size. So again, some HSE data. If you've got a peak traffic flow of 800 people per hour coming through an entrance, you should have 8 to 10 meters of matting built in, permanent built-in matting. Now, most buildings I've walked past have maybe a meter. So if on a wet day you stand inside like I did here and took this photo years ago, and the floor beyond the matting is getting wet, then that should be considered a wet zone. So what we do, the approach we take, is we overlay the slip testing results with the zonal approach, and then that gives you a matrix to kind of figure out, right, where do we need to take action and where don't we need to take action. And for example, somewhere like in washrooms, we would then go into a chimes analysis and we'd say, right, this is slippery, it's high risk of getting wet, it's foreseeably going to get wet. Therefore, what can we control in each area of chimes? So that's kind of the level of detail we should be going into. And then within each of the chimes, there are measurable, quantifiable things you can do to mitigate the risk. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour, starting with Daryl's data and then into some actionable things you can do. So I've got a couple of offers for you. The first one is to get your free copy of the book. So there's a QR code on the screen here, or you can go to scorecard.slipsafety.co.uk/free book and download a free PDF copy, no obligations, no costs or anything like that, of the book that you can go away and read and start to go into more detail into this topic. The second thing that I'd really recommend is that we have a digital quiz which we've developed. And what you do is you go on, you answer a few questions, and then it gives you scores. So it gives you an overall percentage score for how well that building is managing slip risk, as well as a score for each of those 6 chimes. So you can start to pinpoint using this scorecard how well you're doing overall, but also where are you weakest and where are you strongest? Where should you be putting your time and effort? So again, there's a QR code, or you can go to scorecard.slipsafety.co.uk and do the slip risk self-assessment. So drawing it to a close, what I'm known for is trying to take this nagging, annoying, frustrating, but very large problem, as we saw from the data, and trying to get people to understand that it's very serious. It's scientific. It's not simple, it's scientific, but that it absolutely is stoppable. So hopefully you've got from this session today, between myself and Daryl, some insights into those 3 areas. And then for you joining me today, what I hope you've got from this session is that you feel after this that this is a worthwhile thing to do. It's important to change your perspective. It's important to take more action. Remember, that red line is only going in one way if we don't change, or the green line and some of the successes that are possible. And that you should feel you've got a roadmap to do this with some certainty and some clarity. And that's exactly what the book and the scorecard and everything else that we produce as an organization will give you. And the fact that you can measure this and it's all scientific and it's not your opinion, it's the fact, it's the data informing your decisions, I think gives you that confidence to move forward with this. And I guess the last thing for me, and then I'm happy to take a couple of questions, is just to remember that whilst I've shared with you that very serious slip in the co-op, as we've been talking for an hour. The data says that means about 20 people have suffered a broken bone as a result of a slip whilst we've been talking today. So every slip that we can prevent is absolutely a worthwhile and a valid thing to do, and it will bring massive benefits for your organization, but also for you as a safety professional yourself as well. So that's it from me today. I hope you've enjoyed that. Happy to, there's a couple of questions I can see here in the chat, so let me just pick up on those. Happy to take a couple of questions. Dom has asked, is there a risk that organizations see a result of 36 on the pendulum and don't do anything to try to further improve? Yeah, I mean, that is a risk. Obviously, that kind of plays into the question of doing the bare minimum and being compliant versus pushing on to be as safe as we possibly can be. So what I would though say is that most flaws, I mean, we've accumulated data from thousands of tests, and it's something like 20% of flaws achieve that 36, and therefore 80% don't. So most people are sort of in the worst place than that, but absolutely, don't rest on your laurels necessarily at 36. But I would also say, and we're dealing with an example of this now, you can also go overboard. So it's possible to almost over-specify slip resistance and produce a floor that is almost too grippy, too anti-slip, and can start to cause issues with cleanability, maintenance, and even people feeling as if they're tripping on a floor. So I sort of talk about the Goldilocks principle, just enough. We don't want it to be too slippery. We don't want it to be too grippy. We want that sort of nice middle ground, and that's kind of where I would aim for people to get to. Great. Well, look, thank you so much, guys, and thanks, John, in the comments for your words about the service you've had from us and our help. So yeah, I appreciate your custom, obviously. Do go away and take the scorecard. Do download the free book. Do have a good read, and do take on board what I've been saying around this is a worthwhile thing to do, and it's something that is a cause that I really believe we should all be pushing. So hopefully you'll join me on my crusade. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.